I think you come from a unique perspective. You've done this job before. You were a police officer in Chicago, so you know what these officers are going through right now. You've been in their shoes. You've talked about the preparation for the department, but when you talk to the individual officers about potentially stepping into harm's way, about training for this huge event, what do they tell you?
You know, the officers are excited and obviously concerned at the same time. This is a tough job. It's a tough job when it comes to making decisions, and we want our officers to make the best possible decisions. And a lot of times doing that under stressful situations becomes difficult. So there are concerns. Officers are also concerned about how they're going to be judged as they respond to these events. But I am assuring the officers that as long as they follow their training, I will explain every single thing that these officers are doing out here to try to keep this city safe.
And this has been such a busy summer for the city, for the police department. I was just looking, we had the Air and Water Show last weekend, the Bud Billiken Parade, Pride, Lollapalooza, NASCAR. I can imagine your officers have to be exhausted too.
Well, you know, first off, let me say, I couldn't be more proud of these officers and the way that they respond to these events. You're talking the Air and Water Show, you have, you know, 1 million people who converge upon the city to witness that event. You know, the Bud Billiken, Lollapalooza, all of these events and these large-scale events that the Chicago Police Department responds to, our officers are out there every single day working these events. Now, that being said, we are concerned about the wellness of these officers who are working extended hours and in certain situations having days off canceled, which going into next week will happen. We have wellness plans. Each district commander has a wellness plan for the officers to make sure that they're hydrated, make sure they're nourished, and they're getting breaks so that they can rest. We want them to be cognitively sound when they're out there so that they can make the best possible decisions. They're human beings, and oftentimes when we're dealing with human beings, they can make mistakes. So we just want to make sure that we have a plan out there for our officers to make sure that they're well when they're responding to these jobs.
And there's so much attention on them. I just think about the eyes of the nation are going to be watching this, watching your police department. Talk about what that's like.
Well, you know, again, you know, being proud of these officers and the way that they respond, you know, I am 100% certain that when this is over, that pride will grow even more if that's at all possible. Because I know that these officers are going to step up and do the great job that they do every single day when they're out there keeping the city safe. It's a tough job. It's a hard job for anyone who's never walked in those shoes to really understand what these officers are dealing with and what they're facing. And we're expecting a lot of them, right? And there's a lot of scrutiny around policing, but our officers have taken on this challenge. They've decided to go out there, be a part of history. And I have no doubt that when this is all said and done, those officers will make this a successful event.
You've mentioned walking in their shoes. You walked in their shoes. You were a police officer in 1996 when the Democratic National Convention was here the last time. And there was a lot of attention on CPD then.
Yes.
After the violence that happened in 1968. What takeaways from that experience do you bring to this convention?
Well, listen, you know, in 1968, you know, I'm sure my mother was probably pregnant with me at the time. I was born in 1969. And what I will say, in 1996, there was a lot of talk of what occurred in 1968. In 1996, I was a tactical officer in Inglewood at the time, and we participated in that. It turned out to be a successful event because there was some training around that event. It's not 1968. Our officers are trained differently. It's the department has evolved. Our officers have evolved. The training itself has evolved. We've been training for this event for over a year, so the preparedness is what's important. If you don't give officers the tools, the training, then your expectations of them, you know, it's not fair, right? Because what did I give you that would prepare you for those expectations that we have of you, of what the public may have of you? Now with the training around First Amendment, training around the Fourth Amendment, training around de-escalation, and also training around responding to civil unrest and the possibility of a physical response. So giving these officers that type of training raises awareness, but it also raises confidence in those officers when they're out there responding. That being said, we've also put our leadership through that. So this is a top-down effect now, not bottom-up. So the expectations and the responsibilities are not just on the officers, it's on the leadership, and that's from the top down.
I think so many people are involved in this security apparatus. I mean, you're working with federal, state, the county level, the National Guard, so many different participants, but I'm curious, as you're collaborating with those partners, there are so many threats you also have to be aware of and think about. What is the nightmare scenario that keeps you awake at night? What's the crisis that you worry about, that you want to be prepared for?
Well, and I've said this before, nothing keeps me up at night. There are things that I am concerned about. There are things that we should all be concerned about, because not having a concern means that you're not aware of possibilities and those things that are going on. But you mentioned earlier that there's a collaboration across law enforcement agencies, federal partners, state partners, local, county. We have been working together closely. We share information. We share intelligence, intel information that's coming in. We prepare for any possibility. We know there's always the possibility for the lone wolf, those types of scenarios. Those are the things that we're preparing for. Those are the things that we train for. And then the communication and the collaboration across all of these law enforcement agencies is going to help us get through this and help us respond to this and prevent things from happening. A lot of times we don't know that things have been prevented because they didn't occur, but there's a lot of prevention that the public just doesn't know about, and that's a result of the collaboration between all of the law enforcement agencies.
Will you be bringing in outside police departments, like Milwaukee, for example, brought in other police departments from other jurisdictions? Are you doing the same thing here in Chicago?
Yes. So actually, we participated in the RNC out in Milwaukee. So we went out there and helped. Milwaukee is sending a group of officers here. They're the only group right now that's from outside of Illinois. So most of our officers who are going to come in and help are local, local police officers and police departments. And those officers will not be patrolling our streets. We're going to have them securing certain locations that are necessary to be secured. And it frees up our officers, it frees up our Chicago police officers to go out into the field. Because the extensive training that our officers have had in preparation for this event, we need them out in the field. However, those officers who are coming in from other municipalities, we will be providing training for them on our policies and the expectations around that. So they'll be getting between 12 and 16 hours of training.
So they come and you train them. I mean, essentially they're going to be under your command during this week?
Yes, they will be working along with Chicago Police Department, our federal partners, and we'll be working collaboratively together.
It's interesting to see this all hands on deck atmosphere. You kind of touched on this, but I think talk to the residents who don't live near the United Center or McCormick Place. Tell them, how are you going to keep their communities safe during this huge event?
And this is not just about the Democratic National Convention. This is not just about the DNC. Obviously, we have to secure the venues around the DNC. We have to make sure that people are safe and secure, because we know there are going to be a large number of people there. We're expecting protests in that area. However, this is the city of Chicago. This is our city, and we have to keep the city as a whole safe. So it's not just about the DNC. We have a plan in place with each district commander across the entire city, and it's a emergency response plan, a proactive plan to deal with the possibility of any crimes that are going on in those neighborhoods. So we will see our officers still in the neighborhood, still responding to jobs. We are not going to deplete districts where we know we need our police officers to keep our citizens safe here, to to increase manpower around the Democratic National Convention. So what we've done is we've extended hours for officers, and we've canceled days off for that 4-day period or 5-day period. So what we're doing is making sure that the allocations are even across the entire city, because people who live in the city were living here before the Democratic National Convention, and they'll be living here afterwards. Our businesses, we want to make sure that everyone is safe. Businesses can operate in a safe manner. They don't have to worry about looting, things of that nature. Mm-hmm. We will be here to protect the entire city.
You raise a good point. People still need to go to school. They need to go to work. They need to go to the market or do their daily lives. But we were talking to people in the last couple of weeks. There is, I think, a sense of nervousness about the number of protesters that will be downtown during this week. Should people feel like they can't come downtown during the DNC?
No, people should not feel like they can't come downtown. Again, we will have a presence there. We have a plan around protests. Listen, we hope that no matter the number of people who show up here in Chicago to protest, that they do it peacefully. They're exercising their First Amendment rights. But we want them to understand that criminal activity cannot and will not be tolerated in the city. We will not tolerate violence. We will not tolerate any type of crime that leads to vandalism, violence, anything that's going to disrupt the lives of people who are living in this city and people who came here to visit. Even when it comes to blocking traffic, things of that nature, people, like you said, they have to travel, they have to get their kids to school, they have to pick their children up. People are trying to get to hospitals. We want to make sure that people's day-to-day lives are not disrupted because there are some people who want to have their voices heard. Have your voices heard. But that doesn't mean that you get to shut down everyone else's lives in this city. So we'll be out there to make sure that people can go about their day-to-day, do the things that they do on a regular basis, and enjoy the city.
I've heard you draw this fine line between protest and rioting, and how to differentiate between the two, and training your officers to recognize this is a peaceful group of protesters and this is something that might be getting out of hand. How do you delineate the two?
Well, listen, violence is always a non-starter. When we look at violent activity, when we look at attacks on people, when we look at attacks on police officers, it cannot be tolerated, because when we don't believe or feel that our officers should be protecting themselves, then you can't expect those officers to protect anyone else. So we want to make sure that when violence starts, we put an end to it as quickly as possible, because the sooner we put an end to that, we reduce the risk of further physical action. We reduce the risk of injuries, not only to our police officers, but to those that we're taking into custody. So we just want to make sure that we keep those things peaceful. The other thing, vandalism, and we've seen that. We've seen it with, spray painting, damaging windows, storefronts, things of that nature. We're not going to allow that. And arson, we saw that in 2020. If you look at the things that happened in 2020, because if we want to make that distinction, 2020 downtown area was rioting. People lost their lives. People were seriously injured. Officers were seriously injured. Police vehicles were burned. These were, felonious acts by people who converged upon this city to destroy it. We're not going to tolerate that. And our officers are trained to respond to that this time. This is not just a spontaneous event like the event that occurred in 2020. We've prepared for this, and we're ready to go out and defend our city.
I think about 2020 and those images of the burning cars and the looting, and this, not just this election cycle, the previous ones too. Chicago has become a talking point about crime in America, and some candidates and surrogates during the election have used Chicago essentially as a punching bag to drive home that point. saying that Chicago needs the National Guard to keep our streets safe, that crime is a problem. We're an example of it. What do you say to those people who make that argument?
Listen, you know, we always have people who are on the outside looking in, who want to make the determination as to how we should police our city. For those people who want to talk about Chicago in that way, come and visit Chicago. You know, you drive down Lakeshore Drive, you look at the skyline. It's one of the most beautiful cities I've ever seen. And we're here to protect our city. Now, do we have crime? Sure, we have crime. And there's crime across every city in this nation. Obviously, Chicago has become a focal point of that. And I think sometimes, you know, it's exacerbated to some degree, you know, in the media.
Do you think it's unfair, the attention that Chicago?
You know, I would say yes. I would say yes. Now, do we have some crime issues? Absolutely. And we need to focus on those violent crimes that are occurring, because there are people in this city who are being victimized by violent crimes. And those people are living with that trauma every single day. We want to reduce that. We want to respond to situations where we know that we have violent actors and repeat offenders, and we want to get those people off the street and keep them off the street as much as humanly possible. Because when we can do that, now we can reduce the levels of crime. Because we know here that our most violent offenders are also repeat offenders. And if we can keep those repeat offenders, you know, off the streets and hold them accountable for the crimes that they're committing, then we can reduce the level of violent crime in this city.
And this is a subject that I imagine is going to come up during the convention as well, but this idea of how to solve the root issues of crime. And the mayor has talked about treatment, not trauma, trying to create jobs and programs. You mentioned at the City Club the other day talking about creating jobs might not solve some of the problems.
Well,
am I mischaracterizing that? But I just want to clarify your thoughts on how do you get to that root cause of the problem.
Let me be clear. You know, I don't feel that creating jobs might not solve those issues. What I said was certain people have to want those jobs. And there are people out there who do want jobs. There are people out there who do need jobs. And if you give them an alternative, they'll take those jobs in a minute. And when we look at poor people, when we look at people who are suffering, those people who are hungry, and what I was trying to be clear about is making the distinction between people who are poor and they're trying to feed themselves, because I've heard this analogy that people who are committing armed robberies are trying to feed themselves. No, people who are trying to feed themselves go into stores and they steal food. They steal food for themselves, they steal food for their families, because they're hungry. And hunger will drive you, you know, to feed yourself. And if that means that you're going to go in and steal food, you're doing it for that reason. However, those people should not be incarcerated. We should be feeding those people, not locking them up. But when you have someone who is carrying an expensive gun with accessories that turns a handgun into a handheld machine gun. They're in a stolen vehicle, multiple occupants. They drive up to an elderly woman, jump out of a car, stick a gun in her face, threaten to kill her, force her to an ATM, and force her to take her savings out. That is not a person who's trying to feed himself. That is a criminal, a violent criminal who is engaging in criminal activity, who has no regard for human life and the safety of people. They have no respect for the lives of other people. Therefore, those people have to be held accountable. They have to be held accountable. So when jobs are available and people are applying for those jobs, we know that it works. And do we have to get to the root causes of it? Yes, because we don't want people going into that cycle. We don't want young children going into that cycle, but we're talking at least a 20-year fix there. That's something that we need to do over time. So we have to do both. There has to be a level of accountability and enforcement for those who are committing violent crimes. And then we have to create programs so that we get people out of that cycle of violence and out of that cycle of criminal activity.
This is going to take a long process. Do you think we're on the right track?
I believe we are. I believe that as long as we continue to focus on violent crime, and I would say clear reporting about everything that's going on. Oftentimes people take bits and pieces of an event and they're not talking about the whole story, and then they sensationalize those bits and pieces. What we need are a clear focus on the big picture, on the full picture, and all of the information that we need so that people can have a clear understanding of how police officers respond to events and what they were responding to. And then we need to look at the three things, right? The law, training, and policy. We tie those things together, then we can accurately determine how a situation should have unfolded.
I have one last question just to put a button on this, because this is a huge event. Chicago will be in the spotlight. After this is all said and done, how do you think the nation will see the city? How do you think the nation will see your police department?
Successful. I professional, prepared. Those are the things that I believe right now. We have a prepared police department. And I don't want to just tie this just to the Chicago Police Department, because we're working with agencies across the city and people who are working behind the scenes, fire department, OEMC, every other agency within the city, streets and sand. I mean, I'm going to forget a lot of them, but behind the scenes, there's a lot of work being done collaboratively to make this a success. So not only is the Chicago Police Department supporting everyone in the city, we've got a bunch of people in the city supporting the Chicago Police Department in our efforts to keep the city safe. So that being said, with our federal partners, state, local, I just can't say enough about the collaboration here. And this is going to be a safe and successful event.
So we all hope so.
Absolutely.
We know so. Thank you so much, Superintendent. Appreciate it.
Thank you.